Pilot slaps aircraft cleaner. Unaware she's friends with airline owner. Instantly regrets it. The airport is alive with motion. Suitcases roll across polished floors, the rhythmic clicking of heels and hurried footsteps blending with the hum of overhead announcements. Flight attendants move with practiced precision. Pilots stride through terminals with quiet authority, and travelers, lost in their own worlds, check phones, sip coffee, or gaze absently at departure screens. Amidst the orchestrated chaos, tucked away from the sleek, glass-paneled lounges and bustling check-in counters, Sophia stands inside the hangar, her hands moving methodically as she wipes down the interior of an executive jet. The faint scent of disinfectant clings to the air. The plush leather seats gleam under the soft cabin lighting, a testament to her meticulous care. She is good at her job, proud of her work. It's not just cleaning to her. It's about presentation, respect, and dignity. Every aircraft she touches is a reflection of her effort. But today, effort isn't enough. Across the tarmac, Captain Richard Foster marches toward the hangar, his polished shoes striking the concrete with sharp precision. He's the embodiment of authority, the kind of man who commands attention without saying a word. His uniform is crisp, his rank insignia gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and his presence radiates impatience and irritation. Richard is not in the mood to wait. His flight should have already been prepped. The plane should have been ready the moment he walked in. But instead, a minor delay, a matter of minutes, nothing more, has fueled his temper. In his world, there is no room for mistakes, no time for delays, and certainly no tolerance for those beneath him. Sophia, oblivious to the storm about to crash upon her, continues her work. She smooths out a wrinkle on one of the seats, adjusts a headrest, and double-checks the tray tables. She doesn't hear the sharp, approaching footsteps. She doesn't sense the surge of anger radiating from the man now towering behind her. Then, suddenly, a voice. Cold. Clipped. Commanding. What the hell is taking so long? Sophia startles, spinning around to face him. Her gaze meets furious, ice-blue eyes. She blinks, momentarily confused. She wasn't expecting confrontation. She wasn't expecting him. She starts, but Richard doesn't let her finish. His voice rises, sharp and unforgiving. Do you understand what a schedule is? Do you know how much time you've wasted? You're standing here like this is a cafe break while I have places to be. Sophia bristles. She is not someone who backs down easily. She has been in this job for years. She has worked long shifts, thankless hours, ensuring that these aircraft remain spotless, ensuring that people like him fly in comfort. Sir, I was just finishing up. It's only been a few minutes. A mistake. Richard's expression darkens. He doesn't care about the explanation. He doesn't care about fairness, about reason, about respect. And then, it happens. His hand moves too fast for her to react. A sharp crack echoes through the hangar. The slap lands hard against Sophia's cheek. The sting is immediate. A searing burn spreads across her face, the pain like fire licking at her skin. The world around her stops. For a moment, there is only silence. A breathless, shocked silence. The ground crew freezes. A group of flight attendants, once chatting near the entrance, now stare in horror. The hangar, a space usually filled with the low hum of machinery and distant voices, has turned into a vacuum of disbelief. Sophia's eyes widen, her breath catching in her throat. She feels the heat in her cheek, the lingering imprint of fingers pressed into her skin. But more than the pain, more than the physical sting, is the humiliation. Her dignity has just been shattered in front of an audience. And Richard? Richard doesn't care. His expression doesn't change. There's no regret, no hesitation, no second-guessing. He simply straightens his uniform, exhales sharply, and turns his back on her. As if she is nothing. As if the entire moment meant nothing. He strides away, shoulders squared, posture unapologetic. The slap? A minor inconvenience to him. Just a moment of frustration. He doesn't glance back, doesn't acknowledge the gasps or the stunned expressions around him. He is done here. But what Richard doesn't realize, what he could never have predicted, is that the woman he just humiliated is not powerless. And this is not the end of her story. It is just the beginning. The world around Sophia feels like it's moving in slow motion. The faint hum of the aircraft engines, the distant echoes of airport announcements, the soft murmurs of onlookers, it all feels muted, as if she's underwater. The burning sensation on her cheek remains, the imprint of Richard's hand seared into her skin, but it's nothing compared to the storm brewing inside her. Her breath is shallow, her chest tight. She can feel the weight of 100 eyes on her, but she doesn't dare meet their gazes. Some are filled with shock, others with pity. and pity is the last thing she wants. Her co-workers stand frozen, their tools and cleaning rags forgotten in their hands. A few flight attendants by the entrance exchange uneasy glances, shifting uncomfortably as if unsure whether they should say something or just pretend they saw nothing. No one dares to move. No one dares to intervene. Because Richard Foster is not just any pilot. He is one of the most respected captains in the airline, known for his expertise, his commanding presence in the cockpit, and his cold, no-nonsense leadership. People fear him. They fear the consequences of standing against him. Sophia knows this. She understands the unspoken rules of the world she works in. The hierarchy is clear, pilots at the top, ground crew at the bottom. And yet, despite knowing all of this, despite understanding how easily she could be ignored, dismissed, or even fired for retaliating, her heart pounds with defiance. Her fists clench at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She can still hear the slap echoing in her ears, can still feel the shame crawling over her skin like a second layer. But she will not break. She will not cry. She won't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she lifts her chin, forcing her breath to steady. She straightens her posture, adjusting the sleeves of her uniform with slow, deliberate movements. Every muscle in her body is screaming at her to run, to leave this moment behind as fast as possible, but she refuses. Because this moment, this very second, is going to define what comes next. Richard Foster thinks he has won. He thinks this was nothing more than a fleeting moment of frustration, something he will forget by the time he reaches the cockpit. But what he doesn't realize, what he could never see coming, is that his impulsive act of cruelty has set off a chain reaction that will change everything. He has no idea who Sophia truly is. He has no idea of the connection she has. And he has no idea that today will be the day his entire world begins to crumble. Sophia exhales slowly and takes a single step forward. Her coworkers part like a wave, their expressions wary, uncertain. Some are still too stunned to move. Others hesitate as if they want to say something but don't know how. Sophia doesn't stop. She walks away from the plane, away from the man who dared to humiliate her. But she is not walking away defeated. She is walking away with purpose, with fire in her veins and justice in her heart. And Richard? Richard Foster just made the biggest mistake of his life. As Sophia steps out of the hangar, the world seems to shift around her. The bustling noise of the airport fades into the background, muffled by the weight of everything she's feeling. The sting of the slap still burns, but more than that, a simmering fire starts to build within her. It's not a desire for revenge, not a thirst for something violent or dramatic. No, it's a deep-rooted need for fairness. Her shift is over, but she doesn't go home. She's not ready to face the quiet of her apartment, the empty rooms that offer no answers or relief from the chaos inside her mind. Instead, she heads to a place few employees ever need to go, the top floor of the airport's administrative wing, where the elusive and powerful Mr. Bennett, the owner of the airline, holds court. Sophia's stomach twists as she walks through the polished corridors, the walls lined with sleek, expensive decor that only serves to highlight the vast difference between her world and that of the elite. She knows the rumors about Mr. Bennett, how he's ruthless, how he controls everything with an iron grip. But none of that matters right now. She's not here to beg or plead for mercy. She's here because of a long-forgotten connection, one that could very well be her salvation or Richard Foster's undoing. As she approaches his office, the door swings open, and she is met with the sight of Mr. Bennett himself, standing to greet her. There is a calmness about him, a warmth that seems entirely out of place in a man of his power. He's tall, distinguished, and his face carries the weight of someone who's seen it all. His silver hair, neatly combed, catches the light from the windows, but it's his eyes, sharp and filled with genuine concern, that immediately put Sophia at ease. "Sophia," he says warmly, his voice carrying an unexpected familiarity. He steps forward, his expression a mixture of recognition and something deeper, sympathy. He doesn't need to ask why she's here. He's already noticed the subtle signs, the tiredness in her eyes, the stiff way she holds herself. And, of course, there's the red mark on her cheek, now visible under the harsh fluorescent lights of his office. Sophia stands still for a moment, unsure of how to begin. She's not the type to make trouble, to stir the pot. Her instincts tell her to keep quiet, to let it go. But something in Mr. Bennett's gaze holds her steady, something that tells her she's not just another employee in his eyes. "Come in, please," Mr. Bennett says, motioning to a seat across from his desk. There's a subtle authority in his voice, but it's mixed with a warmth that makes her feel safe, in a strange way. Sophia hesitates, then steps into the room, taking a seat in the plush chair. The luxury of the space doesn't escape her. It's a far cry from the sterile, utilitarian environment she's used to. The large windows offer a breathtaking view of the runway, and the quiet hum of the airport seems distant from here. For a moment, they sit in silence. Mr. Bennett watches her, his gaze never leaving her face, as if he's waiting for her to speak. She shifts in her seat, feeling the weight of his attention. Then, after a long pause, he leans forward, his voice soft but firm. "Sophia, what happened?" The question hangs in the air, simple, yet loaded. It's not an accusation, but a genuine inquiry, one that shows he's not just concerned about the incident but also about her. His eyes flicker to the mark on her cheek again, and for the first time since the slap, Sophia feels a sense of being seen. It's a feeling she's not used to. Sophia's mouth feels dry as she searches for the words. She wants to say something, anything, but the humiliation of what happened in the hangar floods back. The memory of Richard Foster's arrogant stride, the way his hand rose without a second thought, fills her with anger. But she doesn't want to start a fight. She doesn't want to tear down the reputation of a man who's so deeply embedded in the airline's culture. She just wants fairness, a chance to be heard, and for someone, anyone, to understand the depth of the injustice she's faced. Her voice cracks, but she clears her throat and presses on. "I don't want trouble. I need you to understand that I'm not an obstacle. I'm not someone you just—" She pauses, her words coming slowly, carefully. "I'm not someone you just slap, because you're frustrated." Mr. Bennett watches her silently for a moment. His expression darkens, his lips thinning as if he's processing her words. Then, without warning, he stands up. The sudden shift in his demeanor is almost imperceptible, but Sophia catches it, the way his jaw tightens, the way his shoulders square. He's angry, but not with her. With Richard Foster. "I see," he says, his voice colder now, but still with that underlying warmth. "I'm glad you came to me, Sophia. And I want you to know, you don't have to deal with this on your own." She blinks, uncertain of what to say next. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, but I don't want revenge. I just want—" Her voice falters. "I want him to understand that this isn't okay." Mr. Bennett walks to his desk and picks up the phone with an air of purpose. He's not asking for her permission. He's not seeking her approval. He's already making decisions for her, decisions that will have consequences. "I understand," he says. "You're right. What happened was unforgivable. I'll make sure Richard understands the weight of his actions. No one, not even him, is above accountability." Before she can even comprehend the full meaning of his words, he's already dialing a number. The phone rings twice, and then he speaks in a voice that is filled with quiet authority. "Hello, Richard? It's Bennett. We need to talk. Now." Sophia's heart skips a beat as she realizes the gravity of the situation. The chain of events has already been set into motion, and Richard Foster has no idea that the woman he slapped is someone Mr. Bennett considers family. Sophia watches as Mr. Bennett hangs up the phone and turns back to her, his expression resolute. "You don't have to worry about a thing, Sophia. You've done the right thing. This ends now." As she sits there, she can't help but wonder just how far this will go. How will Richard react when he finds out who she is? How will he respond to the weight of the power he's just invited into his life? And as she stands to leave, her thoughts swirl with uncertainty and a growing sense of anticipation. She may have come here seeking fairness, but what she's about to witness could change the course of not just her life, but Richard Foster's as well. What Mr. Bennett has just set in motion is a reckoning that neither of them can escape. The hum of the airport, the steady rhythm of announcements echoing overhead, does nothing to shake Richard's focus. He strides through the terminal with the air of a man accustomed to command, his every step echoing in the cavernous space, his presence drawing attention without effort. He's not just a pilot. In his mind, he is the captain, the one who directs the flow of the entire airline, its success and failure tied directly to his competence and stature. And today, as he walks toward the plane that awaits him, he feels the unmistakable buzz of confidence that always accompanies him. Richard Foster is a man who has lived a life of privilege, of power, and most importantly, control. He's flown high above the world, both literally and figuratively, looking down on those beneath him with a sense of superiority that borders on arrogance. He never looks down, not on the ground, not on the people around him. Everything revolves around him. And today, as he prepares for yet another flight, he's certain that his authority is unshakable. As he approaches the plane, the ground crew springs into motion, hastily completing their last-minute checks. Richard barely acknowledges them, his eyes scanning the horizon, lost in his own world of arrogance. He barks out orders to the crew with such authority that anyone in earshot can feel the sharp edge of his command. His voice cuts through the air, loud, imposing, as if every word carries the weight of his position. Let's get this thing moving. You move those bags faster. I'm not waiting for anyone today. The crew members exchange uncomfortable glances, but no one dares to speak out. The aura of intimidation surrounding Richard is thick, and everyone knows better than to challenge him. He walks past them, his boots clicking sharply on the tarmac, oblivious to the discontent he leaves in his wake. To him, they're just pawns, workers who are nothing more than obstacles in his path. It's a mindset he's had for years, and one that has never failed him. Inside the plane, the atmosphere is equally tense, though for entirely different reasons. The cabin crew is going through their final checks, preparing for another routine flight, but there's a sense of apprehension hanging in the air. No one speaks about it openly, but the crew has started to feel the friction that Richard brings. They whisper among themselves about his temper, his unpredictable outbursts, and how he can turn a simple mistake into a public spectacle. Still, they follow orders, not wanting to risk his wrath. As Richard steps into the cockpit, he's met with the familiar, welcoming hum of the aircraft's systems. He takes his seat, adjusting the controls with an ease that comes from years of experience. The seatbelt sign flickers briefly before he turns it off with a decisive press. He's ready. His team is ready. Everything is set in motion, and he feels the satisfaction that comes with being the one who commands the situation. But it's not the flight that preoccupies him now. No, Richard is thinking about something else. He's thinking about the little inconvenience earlier, Sophia, the cleaner, the one who had the audacity to get in his way. Her hesitation, the way she hesitated to move, the look in her eyes. He sees her clearly in his mind's eye. A nobody, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He'd made a quick decision. Too quick, perhaps, but he didn't care. She was nothing more than an obstacle in his way, and he had the right to do whatever it took to maintain his authority. A flicker of doubt crosses his mind, but it vanishes as quickly as it came. Richard shakes his head, brushing off the thought. He's never been the type to second-guess himself, and he certainly won't start now. No one questions Richard Foster. Not his passengers. Not his crew. Not anyone. He knows the power he wields, and it's absolute. He leans back in his seat, eyes closed for a moment, enjoying the familiar comfort of his position. He's in control. He's always been in control. And today, he feels the quiet thrill of dominance, a rush that courses through him every time he takes command of an aircraft. It's the adrenaline, the sense of being above it all, that keeps him going. As the plane prepares for takeoff, Richard runs through his checklist, his mind calculating every detail. Flaps adjusted. Check. Altimeter set. Check. Speed gauges steady. Check. His confidence grows with each adjustment, each system that falls into place. The hum of the engines, the sound of the aircraft's wings cutting through the air, are all part of the ritual that makes him feel invincible. But there's something he doesn't know, something that's about to bring his world crashing down. He has no idea that in the quiet, plush office of Mr. Bennett, the very man he struck earlier is not some random cleaner, but a woman with ties to the airline's owner, someone whose power is vastly beyond anything Richard could ever hope to control. Richard continues with his preparations, unaware that his world is about to shift beneath him. His belief in his invulnerability is absolute, as unwavering as the laws of physics. And yet, the universe has a way of humbling the most arrogant of men. The very confidence he relies on so heavily will soon be his downfall. But beneath the smooth surface of his unshakable confidence, a storm is quietly brewing, one that will soon dismantle everything he's taken for granted. The consequences of his actions have already begun to gather, and when they finally come crashing down, they will hit him with a force he never saw coming. The flight continues, and Richard believes it's just another day, another routine mission. But it won't be. The calm before the storm is a dangerous thing, and Richard Foster is about to learn that no one is truly untouchable. Richard's mind is consumed with his flight. The sound of the engines, the hum of the cockpit systems, and the satisfaction of being in control, all of it feels familiar, comforting. This is what he knows, and it's what he thrives on. The world outside the plane, outside the cockpit, has always been secondary to him. Everything he does, every decision he makes, has always been without consequence. After all, he is untouchable. But that belief is about to shatter. Richard's phone buzzes on the console, pulling him momentarily from his thoughts. He glances at the screen, expecting it to be a routine call or perhaps a message from one of the crew members confirming details about the flight. But instead, it's an alert from the airline's headquarters. The message reads, "Urgent. Please report to the boardroom immediately. Mr. Bennett requires your presence." He reads it again, skeptical. "Urgent?" Richard scoffs under his breath, tossing the phone aside. Surely, this is nothing more than a routine meeting. He's flown hundreds of times without incident. The airline is lucky to have him, and everyone knows it. The thought of a routine meeting is laughable. The arrogance that courses through his veins insists that nothing can touch him. Still, though, the message nags at him. He shrugs it off and orders the plane's systems to be double-checked. No sense in rushing when there's nothing to worry about. Minutes later, the ground crew files into the cockpit for their final checks. Richard barks orders, dismissing the unease beginning to settle in his gut. But deep down, the nagging feeling remains. Something doesn't feel right. He pushes the thought aside, dismissing it as a temporary distraction. As the last crew member steps off the aircraft, Richard grabs his bag and heads toward the airport's terminal. The air feels colder now, like the weight of something heavy is hanging over him, but he ignores it. In his mind, there's nothing to fear. He's done nothing wrong. Why should he be worried? Arriving at the building, Richard strides confidently through the hallways, each step echoing through the empty spaces, the sound amplifying his sense of control. The security guards at the entrance nod at him without a word, as if he's a regular, as if they know he's someone they can never cross. Richard doesn't acknowledge them. He's too preoccupied with the thoughts racing through his mind, trying to work out why he's been summoned. Could it be the crew? A slight delay? He's never been called to the boardroom on such short notice before. It's unusual, and that alone should have triggered some kind of warning within him. But Richard isn't like most people. His ego shields him, convinces him that it's just another day, and nothing can touch him. When he steps into the boardroom, it's colder than he expected. The room, typically filled with chatter and bustling executives, is completely silent. The air feels thick with tension. Richard's eyes scan the table, each executive sitting there staring at him with sharp, piercing gazes. Their expressions are unreadable, like a group of statues, carved out of stone, observing an intruder. The silence hits him like a cold wave, and for the first time, Richard feels a slight ripple of discomfort, a tiny crack in his armor. But it doesn't stop him. He walks in with his usual swagger, shoulders squared, head high. The large, polished table gleams under the fluorescent lights, and at the far end sits Mr. Bennett, the owner of the airline. The man's presence alone is enough to command respect. But there's something about the way Mr. Bennett is sitting now that feels different. There's no warm smile, no acknowledgement. His face is a mask, serious, unreadable, and cold. Richard's steps falter just for a moment. He's never seen Mr. Bennett like this before. Sitting beside Mr. Bennett, just a few feet away, is Sophia. Her presence feels almost out of place, and it causes an uncomfortable tightness to form in Richard's chest. The last time he saw her, she was just a cleaner, someone beneath him, not worth his time or attention. But now she's sitting there, at the table, looking at him with an expression he can't quite read. There's something about her gaze, something that doesn't sit right with him. Richard forces a smile, trying to regain his composure, but the expression falters. It's too late. The room feels oppressive, the weight of 1,000 eyes staring him down. He stands there for a moment, his mind racing, but he quickly shakes it off. He is in control. He is untouchable. "Mr. Bennett," Richard begins, his voice firm, but there's a slight quiver of unease he can't shake. "What's all this about?" "I'm a little busy, you know." Mr. Bennett doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he presses a button on the remote in his hand, and the lights in the room flicker for a moment. A screen mounted on the wall hums to life, casting a cold glow over the boardroom. Richard's heart skips a beat. He's not sure what he's expecting, but he's definitely not prepared for what happens next. The security footage begins to play. It's the footage from earlier that day, the moment he slapped Sophia. The video shows him approaching her, his figure towering over her as she kneels, wiping down the seats of the jet. The video doesn't miss a thing. Every detail is clear. Richard can see himself, his face contorted with irritation, walking toward Sophia. He watches in silence as he raises his hand, the sharp slap landing across her cheek with a sickening crack that echoes through the empty hangar. Richard watches the footage in disbelief. His stomach churns, and for the first time in a long while, Richard feels a knot of fear twist deep inside him. This was no simple misunderstanding. This wasn't a minor incident. This was a public humiliation. His cruel, reckless act captured on camera for all to see. The weight of his actions settles heavily on him, and as much as he tries to deny it, he knows that everything is about to change. The video continues, showing Sophia standing there, frozen, as onlookers gasp in shock. Richard's heart races as he watches the crowd's reaction, his own shame beginning to seep through his skin. The tension in the room is suffocating. He can feel the eyes of everyone around him now, burning into him. His own breath becomes shallow as he realizes just how much damage he's done, not just to Sophia, but to himself. The footage ends, and the silence in the room feels deafening. Mr. Bennett's eyes lock onto Richard's, cold and unwavering. There is no warmth in his gaze now, no understanding. Just anger, disappointment. Sophia's presence beside him feels like a weight pressing down on Richard's chest. The entire room feels like it's closing in on him, and he stands there, exposed and vulnerable, his mind racing, searching for a way to explain himself. But there is no explanation. Richard opens his mouth to speak, but the words won't come. He stumbles, unsure of how to defend himself. He wants to say something, anything to save face, but nothing seems adequate. How can he justify a slap? How can he explain humiliating someone so publicly, so cruelly? And then Mr. Bennett speaks, his voice calm but laced with a chilling authority. "You think you're untouchable, don't you, Richard?" Mr. Bennett's voice rings out in the room, low and cutting. "You think your actions have no consequences." Richard's heart drops as Mr. Bennett's words pierce through the layers of arrogance that have protected him for so long. There is no doubt in the air now. This is not just about a slap. This is about power, respect, and a fundamental line that Richard has crossed. Mr. Bennett stands up from his seat, his eyes not leaving Richard for a second. He doesn't yell. He doesn't need to. His presence, his very stillness, carries more weight than any shout could. The silence stretches for a moment, thick and suffocating, and Richard feels himself shrink under it. "I trusted you, Richard," Mr. Bennett continues, his tone like ice. "You've been nothing but a disappointment." Richard stands there, his mind spinning, trying to process everything that's happening. His hands are shaking slightly now, and he has never felt so exposed. All his bravado, all his authority, seems insignificant in the face of what's unfolding. He was so sure that he could walk through life without facing the consequences of his actions. But now, the world feels different. Sophia's gaze never leaves him. There's no anger in her eyes, no hatred, just a quiet strength that Richard can't ignore. She doesn't need to say a word. The message is clear. She doesn't need revenge. She only wants justice. As Richard stands there, the magnitude of his wrongdoing becomes undeniable. He had thought he was above it all, above the rules, above the people he deemed beneath him. But in that moment, he realizes just how wrong he was. His actions have consequences. They always do. And he is about to face them in the hardest way imaginable. The boardroom, once a place of power, now feels like a trial. The executives sit in their seats, their eyes fixed on Richard, waiting for him to say something, anything. But the words elude him. His mind is a blur, and he knows that no matter what he says, it won't be enough to undo the damage he has caused. The look on Mr. Bennett's face, the weight of Sophia's presence, the cold silence, it all tells him the same thing. This is the end. He had lived his life without ever considering the impact of his actions, but now the world around him has shifted. The consequences are no longer theoretical. They're here, and there's no escaping them. This is the moment that will change everything. The silence in the boardroom is suffocating, thick with the weight of what has just transpired. The sound of the slap, though long past, lingers in the air like an unshakable cloud of tension. The sharp crack of contact reverberates in Richard's ears, a cruel reminder of the moment when his arrogance crossed a line he can never uncross. The cold, unforgiving gaze of the executives drills into him, their disapproval cutting through him like a blade. Richard's mind races, but the words won't come. His hands, once steady and sure, now tremble at his sides. The once confident posture he had carried into the room is gone, replaced by a man who stands utterly exposed. His heart beats faster with each second that passes in the frozen silence. He opens his mouth, stammering, desperate to find some justification for his actions, but nothing seems adequate. "I didn't mean." It wasn't. His voice falters, barely a whisper, as if the room itself is suffocating him. He tries to reach for the words that might salvage some sense of control, but the evidence is undeniable. The video, the shocked expressions of those who had witnessed the incident, The raw humiliation of it all. There is no escaping it. The slap, the act of violence, has left its mark not just on Sophia but on Richard's very reputation. And now, in this room, his career is hanging by a thread. Richard's gaze shifts to Mr. Bennett, the one man who holds the power to decide his fate. There is no warmth in the businessman's eyes, no sign of understanding. Only a cold, lethal determination. Mr. Bennett's expression is unreadable, but the air around him feels charged, like the calm before a storm. Richard is not prepared for what's about to happen, but deep down, he knows it's inevitable. Sophia sits beside Mr. Bennett, her presence commanding yet calm, a quiet strength emanating from her as she watches the scene unfold. Her eyes don't show anger, just a quiet resolve. She doesn't need to speak. The pain she must feel is impossible to fully comprehend, but she doesn't need revenge. All she wanted was justice. Richard gulps, sweat trickling down his neck. He is drowning in the consequences of his actions, and he knows there is no way out. He tries again to speak, to explain, to beg, but his words are lost in the overwhelming sense of inevitability. The world has shifted. His actions, his lack of humanity, have brought him to this moment, a reckoning he never imagined possible. Finally, Mr. Bennett's voice cuts through the suffocating silence, low and chilling, like ice scraping against stone. You are done here. The words hang in the air, final and unyielding. They are not just the end of Richard's day, they are the end of his career. No second chances. No explanation will change what he's done. The room holds its breath as Richard's knees threaten to buckle beneath him. He wants to say something, anything, but the reality of what's happening is too much to bear. His bravado has been stripped away, leaving behind only shame. You're fired, Richard, Mr. Bennett adds, the words cutting through the air like a sentence of death. His tone is steady, emotionless. There is no room for negotiation, no room for pleading. Richard is not just being punished, he is being erased from the world he once controlled. Everything he worked for, everything he believed about his invincibility, crumbles in a single moment. Richard stumbles backward, his vision blurring as the reality of his downfall sinks in. He feels like the floor beneath him is about to give way, but he can't move. He stands frozen, the echo of Mr. Bennett's voice ringing in his ears, louder than any sound he's ever heard. He was once a man with power, with status, with respect. But now, all that remains is the bitter taste of defeat. Mr. Bennett turns away, signaling the end of the conversation. He doesn't need to say more. The room is already alive with the electric tension of Richard's disgrace. He was once untouchable, now he is nothing. And as he stumbles out of the room, the cold weight of his downfall presses down on him with every step, the echo of the slap haunting him until the very end. The words, "You're done here," echo in Richard's mind, louder and more unforgiving with every passing second. His pulse races, a sharp, frantic rhythm pounding in his ears as if his heart itself is trying to escape the weight of the crushing reality. The room has turned into a whirlwind of chaos inside his mind, but outwardly he stands frozen, powerless. The invincible man, the one who had once stood tall, untouchable, is now reduced to nothing but a shell of desperation. His eyes dart to the faces of the executives, their expressions cold, unwavering. There's no sign of sympathy, no glimmer of understanding. Only indifference. Only the cold, uncompromising truth. Richard had spent years commanding respect, barking orders at those beneath him, forcing others to bow to his will. But now, it is he who is at the mercy of others, and it's a fate he is entirely unprepared for. I can explain, he stammers, his voice thick with panic. The words spill out of him in a rush, but they are empty, hollow. They carry no weight. It's the sound of a man who knows he's already lost, but is too afraid to face it. His fingers twitch, as if reaching for something, anything, to hold on to. His entire life has been built on control, on the belief that no matter what, he could always talk his way out of any situation. But now, in the face of undeniable proof and a boardroom full of people who won't listen, those skills mean nothing. His gaze shifts to Mr. Bennett, his face contorting in desperation. Mr. Bennett, please. I've been with this airline for so long. You know what I can do. This was a mistake. A moment of frustration. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to escalate like this. He pauses, but the words fall flat, offering nothing but the hollow remnants of a man who had once believed himself untouchable. Richard's breath catches in his throat as he sees the quiet resolve in Mr. Bennett's eyes, the faint flicker of something cold and unrelenting. The businessman's face has not changed since Richard first stepped into the room. There is no mercy, no room for negotiation, just the cold reality of his downfall. It's like a final judgment, a sentence that Richard can do nothing to alter. And yet, he can't stop. He can't stop trying to beg. He turns to the other executives, his eyes frantic. Please, he pleads, his voice cracking. I've worked my whole life for this. I've made this airline what it is. I've brought in millions. I've been loyal to this company. Don't let one mistake define me. I'll make things right. I'll do anything. Please. The words are desperate, hopeless, but they fall on deaf ears. Every plea he offers seems to sink deeper into the abyss, swallowed by the ice-cold atmosphere that now surrounds him. He is alone, standing in the very place that used to be his domain, but now feels like a foreign land, a place where he no longer holds any power. Whereas every word, once laced with authority, now seems pitiful, like the desperate gasps of a man drowning. Richard's mind spirals into a haze. His license revoked. The privilege of flying, the respect he once commanded, is all gone in an instant. The thing that defined him, that made him feel important, is stripped away in a single, irreversible move. His career gone. The airline that he once ruled with arrogance has now cast him aside, as if he were no more than a disposable piece. He feels the weight of his failure sinking into his chest, crushing him under its unbearable force. He tries to stand taller, but his knees feel weak beneath him. The unfamiliar sensation of being powerless is almost unbearable. His mind races for some sort of out, a way to salvage this, a way to turn back time, but there is none. The truth is inescapable. For the first time in his life, Richard is utterly, completely powerless. The words he once used to command others now seem foreign, ineffective, like a language no one speaks anymore. Richard takes a shaky step back, his breath ragged, his face flushed with the heat of shame. His hands grip the edges of the table, as though he can find some sort of refuge in it. He looks around the room, seeking a shred of mercy, but there is none. Not from Mr. Bennett. Not from the executives. Not from the world he once controlled. The truth crashes over him with full force. There is no turning back. The doors of mercy have slammed shut, and he is on the outside, locked out of the world that once belonged to him. He is a man broken, clinging to the last vestiges of pride that are rapidly slipping away, one desperate plea at a time. The door to the boardroom swings shut behind Richard, the sound echoing through the empty hallways as he stumbles out, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his actions has finally caught up with him, and he has nowhere to go but down. As he vanishes into the distance, his future hanging in the balance, Sophia stands tall, strong, and unbroken. The moment feels surreal, like the world has shifted on its axis, and she is finally standing in the place she deserves. The sting of the slap is gone, replaced by a sense of empowerment and justice. She isn't looking for revenge. No, that's not what she's after. What she has fought for is something more meaningful: respect. True respect is not earned by cruelty or arrogance. It is earned through strength, dignity, and hard work. And today, Sophia has proven that. Sophia turns to Mr. Bennett, the man who has witnessed her grace under pressure and recognized her unwavering character. He smiles at her, his eyes filled with respect, a silent acknowledgement of the battle she fought and won. Without hesitation, he offers her a promotion, a step up, a new challenge, one that she's more than ready to take on. It's not given to her out of pity or sympathy. It's given because she has more than earned it. She accepts, not with a sense of revenge, but with quiet pride. This is her moment, a moment where the world has finally seen her for who she truly is, a woman of resilience, strength, and integrity. The message is clear to everyone watching. Respect is not something to be demanded. It's something that's given to those who deserve it. As the weight of this new chapter settles into her, she knows that this is just the beginning. The world is not always kind, but it is fair. And sometimes, justice isn't just about making the wrongs right. It's about making sure those who deserve it rise above, despite the obstacles in their way. And so, as Sophia stands at the threshold of this new chapter in her life, she knows the journey ahead will be hard, but it will be hers to walk. She's no longer the invisible worker, the one overlooked and mistreated. She is a force to be reckoned with. And today, justice has been served. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching.